if you get one night of poor sleep, when they do brain scans to kind of see how the brain looks different after a night of poor sleep compared to a night of typical sleep, the part
Yeah.
of our brain, the front part, it's called the prefrontal cortex, that part is not as active after poor sleep. And that part of our brain is associated with tasks and behaviors such as, you know, controlling my impulses and planning for my day and, being able to kind of reason and think through things.
Hi, moms. Welcome to Christian Homeschool Mom Podcast. I'm your host, Eve Owens. I'm a wife to James, a homeschooling mom of five, and a coach helping Christian moms start their homeschool journey with faith, peace, and confidence. This is a space where we can come together to encourage, equip, and empower fellow moms who are raising godly children in this ungodly world. Whether you're a parent, a homeschooling mom, or someone seeking inspiration, I hope my experiences resonate with you. I invite you to listen in, reflect on your own story, and perhaps you'll find some encouragement today. We'll dive into practical tips, inspiring stories, and biblical wisdom that will help you navigate this beautiful, challenging, and rewarding path. So grab your tea or coffee or a glass of water, sit back, and let's grow together in faith. So today I have a special guest. He's a sleep doctor and is here to share with us about the benefits of sleep, which sometimes as a mom, when we are busy or stuff like that, we sometimes forget how important it is. So it's good to have a little reminder about it. I'll be one of those that I need that reminder. So Benjamin, thanks for today. Welcome to this podcast.
Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah. So would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners today?
Sure. So I am a sleep medicine physician located out of San Antonio, Texas. I have training both in sleep medicine. So that is everything from insomnia, narcolepsy, sleep apnea, anything that disrupts your sleep. But also as a pediatrician as well. That was my primary training. So my niche and my heart is for families and for kids' sleep in particular.
Yeah.
But I'm credentialed and have experience treating sleep for a whole uh, host of ages, from birth all the way to old age. So
I was like saying to him earlier that I'm not even really familiar. I'm originally from the Philippines, right? But I live here in Ireland, and I'm not really familiar that there's really a specific like sleep doctor, which is actually great to have, you know. So, in your perspective, and Benjamin as a doctor, what does really healthy sleep look like? You know, both for us parents and for our children.
so the main thing that people sometimes confuse about pediatric sleep versus adult sleep is just that kids need more sleep and it's dynamic as they get older. So I think we were
Mm-hmm.
talking a little bit beforehand saying, definitely most people realize newborn babies, for some parents, they're like, they should be sleeping more. When I say that they
Yeah.
sleep a lot, they're like, there's no way this kid never sleeps. But in general, in the newborn period, in the first month, infants sleep 12 to 15 hours, or actually 14 to 17 hours per 24-hour period. And then closer to the 6 week mark or so, that usually kind of takes a little jump down to be 12 to 15 hours for the rest of
Mm-hmm.
the first year of life. Um, and uh, and so that continues to decrease until teenage years to
Yeah.
about 8 to 10 hours per day. So no matter what, all children need more sleep than a standard adult, which is 7 to 9 hours. And so sometimes I think there is improved education and awareness about sleep and its importance. But a lot of times people just know 8 hours as like kind of the standard. But if you were
Yeah.
putting that for like a school age child who needs 9 to 10 hours, then that might actually be not enough sleep. So recognizing that we start out in life needing a lot more sleep. When I'm teaching other doctors, I tell them from birth to 2 years old, sleep is the primary activity of life. And the fact that birth to 2 years old, children should be sleeping more than 12 hours a day, and so majority of the 24-hour period. So
Okay.
if we're not aware of that and we're not tracking that, then it's important for
Mm-hmm.
physicians to know when they need to refer to a sleep medicine doctor, when something is not necessarily just a quote unquote sleep regression or something that needs to improve on its own.
Okay. So what would be the bracket then? So let's say if I know you mentioned that, up to 2 years you need how many did you say? Like 12 to 17 hours, did you say?
Yeah, so usually 14 to 17 in that
14 to
first month or two of life. Then that drops down
okay.
to about 12 to 15. And that's usually kind of where you are for most of the first year. And then once you're getting into the toddler age range, then you're closer to about 11 to 13 hours or so. And then once you're hitting school age, that's when you're dropping down to about 9 to 10 hours. And there's ranges for a reason, because even though those are the typical, there are, if you think of it as like a bell curve, there are some kids who are just kind of on the outer edge. They're not way out here that they're abnormal, but they're not
Yeah.
in the middle. So let's take an average school age child. 9 to 10 hours is what's expected, but there are some children that sleep 8 hours and are totally fine. They don't have any problems and they're able to function during their day. And there are some kids who actually need closer to 11 hours. And so my job as a sleep physician, most of the kids that I see are in that quote unquote might be normal category,
Yeah.
because moms, they're in their mom's group and all these other moms are talking about how their kids sleep, like 11 hours or something like that, and they're like, oh my gosh, my kid only sleeps 8 hours, like what's going
Yeah, yeah.
on? And so that's my job, when I see families, is to some reassurance to say, hey, we're not actually fully outside of that normal realm yet. Versus if
Mhm.
we are, then that's when we start getting concerned about how that might be impacting the body and what to do about it.
Okay. Because I have a toddler. I have a 2-year-old and my oldest is 15, right? So I'm like checking I'm listening to it because I'm watching how many hours my children like sleep, but usually they would sleep 8 to 9 hours. Although I would tell them, sleep more, no, but mommy, the more I stay in bed longer, I feel like more tired, so they want to be up early, but I'm kind of like, no, lie on for more. But even if I lie down, mom, I can't go back to sleep. So they would rather like get up. So I want to ask you, so now with the, families that you're meeting or that you've seen, okay, so what are the common sleep problems that you have noticed or you've seen in these families?
Yeah, I'd say the most common tends to be insomnia of one, for lack of
Yes.
better words, flavor for another. So,
Yeah.
a 2-year-old who's having difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep is usually very different from a 12-year-old who's having
Yes.
difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell all of my families, sleep is a biological and psychological process within a cultural and social context. And so, when we talk about sleep problems, it's real easy when you go online to see a lot of information about a lot of kind of different things, whether you should sleep train, should not sleep train, whether you
Yeah.
should do this supplement or not. There's all this information out there. And so really, I kind of talk to families about what is it that works for your family and your situation and your sleep specifically, and making sure that we're able to reach that in a way that's healthy for you and healthy for the child as well. So usually I'm looking at a lot of difficulty for like bedtime resistance in kids, falling asleep. We call that behavioral insomnia due to limit setting issues. So we call them curtain calls. The kids who are like, I want another glass of water. I want another story. I want another hug.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
afraid of the dark. And you're like, are you actually afraid of the dark? Or are you just trying to get me to come back into the bedroom,
Yes.
kind of a thing? So,
Yes.
so that can be one thing. And any of those things, they're not necessarily bad or they're not harmful on their own. It's just if it's impacting a child's sleep patterns to the point that they're not getting the sleep that they need. Um, and the best way to figure that out is to just take a sleep diary of a child for about 2 weeks. And so any poor sleep that they're getting, our body's usually good about trying to catch up. Sometimes we overcorrect, but when you take all of that sleep over a 2 week period and average that, then that's a good rough estimate of the baseline of what that child specifically needs. So, your toddler, you might do a sleep diary and that says that they need, 11 hours over the course of 2 weeks, whereas your teenager might only need 8 hours, kind of a thing. And so then that's helpful for parents because then they can use that. And so when the kid's getting up at 5 a.m. and you're like, oh my gosh, I still need to sleep, like go back to bed, kind of a thing, that might be normal for that child. So you can do a little bit of mental math and be like, okay, like how much sleep did you get? Okay, you've gotten close to about 8 hours. It's probably okay for you to go ahead and wake up even though it's super early because your body is specifically ready to be awake. Whereas other kiddos, maybe they need to try and lay back down, kind of a thing too.
Yeah, because I actually have one son that he's really up early, because we're homeschooling, right? And me and my husband will be up at 6 o'clock, okay, because he has some appointments and stuff like that. And he will be up as well that early. But I would tell them, can you just not be up like 7 o'clock? You know what I mean? So you can have one more hour, get up at 7. But it's like, Mom, I can't. So that's like his thing. He would love to be up at 6 o'clock, and he just wants to be early in everything. He can have like time with God. He can have his own personal devotion while the house is still quiet, which one of the things that I love to do in the morning. So I have like a buddy with me. So he would love to do that. And then he wants to start kind of just like study already, have his own thing. He wants everything early to be done. So I was thinking, did he get enough sleep? Because I know if you have poor sleep as a doctor, how will it affect the child's mood or behavior or learning if a child has poor sleeping habit?
Yeah, great question. So in general, we know that even if you get one night of poor sleep, when they do brain scans to kind of see how the brain looks different after a night of poor sleep compared to a night of typical sleep, the part
Yeah.
of our brain, the front part, it's called the prefrontal cortex. That part is not as active after poor sleep. And that part of our brain is associated with tasks and behaviors such as, you know, controlling my impulses and planning for my day and being able to kind of reason and think through things. So kind of those parts of ourselves, usually we're seeing more of the prefrontal cortex lighting up when you're doing that well, versus there's other parts of our brain, there are lower parts that are more the emotional regulation. And so then that part, well, I say emotional regulation, it's more of the emotions. And so usually
Yeah.
that is kind of dampened. And then when you have poor sleep, those emotional parts of our brains usually are kind of working overtime a little bit. And so,
Mhm.
all of that, which, I'm not saying anything new necessarily to any parent who has a toddler
Yeah.
who's not sleeping well. It's like, okay, you're moody. You're, like not acting like your typical self. Maybe I am making some, poor decisions or impulsive decisions that I maybe not otherwise would make if I had a good night's sleep. But another big part about it too is as kids are growing, their brains are growing as well. So all of those
Mhm.
changes, you think about that in an adult who has a fully formed, developed brain, then we're our body over time, will um, there will be consequences if we have poor sleep for our whole entire lives, and we will kind of pay that price in our
Yeah.
old age. But part of that price for children is in how their brain is developing as well. And so we know there are all of these associations with children who have, diagnoses such as autism or ADHD or even cerebral palsy or other kind of um, uh, di- diagnoses that impact your brain. That there's this association with poor sleep. And so, we still are trying to kind of figure out what do we do based upon that. For
Yeah.
a child who is diagnosed with autism, actually, when they've done like studies where they follow children over
Yeah.
time, they've
Yeah.
found out that the children who were diagnosed with autism had worse sleep or less sleep several years before they even got an autism diagnosis. That it was changed from the typically developed children as well. So we know that there is this link and this association with the brain developing and the sleep that we need. And so
Yeah.
that's why I am so vigilant when we were talking about that bell curve and those kids who
Yes.
are in that like maybe normal versus really abnormal. Like if you are definitely outside of those normal ranges, that's a very different conversation, and we're talking about very different interventions or methods to kind of help with the sleep compared to a kid who's within that normal range.
So, do you think then that we need to be strict with regards to the sleep routine of our children, or do we need to be flexible? What would be your advice then?
Yep, yep. And not a very satisfying answer, but it depends. If I am, ideal purist of like, oh, I'm just focusing on your sleep, then yes, we want you to get age appropriate sleep every single night of your life, that you're having it consistently. If your body needs 8 hours, then you're only in your bed for about 8.5 hours with the same bedtime, same wake time, and that's it. Obviously, life gets in the way of that,
Hmm.
especially for parents today. And so, it's so hard to have that consistency. And also, there's some things like you were talking about with I have friends or family coming over, or
Yeah.
have a holiday, or these different events. And we just had Easter at the time that we're recording this, and there are some traditions in the Christian church that they stay up really late the Saturday
Hmm.
leading into Sunday Easter kind of
Yeah.
thing. So there are commitments that we have as people that may require not having a typical kind of sleep schedule. So it's a
Yes.
matter of balance, I think, is kind of how I talk about it. And what we need for each family. The family that their sleep is so chaotic because parents are not consistent with giving those boundaries and those
Yeah.
guidelines.
Yeah.
That's a very different family from the family who might have that consistently, but maybe they've just filled up their life with so many things that it makes it difficult for them to have kind of a consistent bedtime and wake time. So it's
Okay.
a broad umbrella of what could be contributing to it. And that's, if I was seeing your family in my clinic, then I have, 40 minutes to be able to kind of go through all the paperwork and see all your history and answer all my questions and all that to
Yeah.
see kind of
Yeah.
learn who are you? What's going on with your specific
Yeah.
family? But I'd say most families know um, if they're having difficulty with kind of
Yes.
keeping those guardrails. And that does have consequences. When we think about how our sleep works, we talk about sleep as sleep doctors with your stages of sleep. So you have non-REM, so when your eyes are closed, they're not moving around. Non-REM, which is rapid eye movement, 1, 2, and 3. And so 1 is like transitional, I'm kind of going into sleep. 2 is where we're spending most of the night usually, and then we dip down into deep sleep, which is non-REM 3, or sometimes called slow wave sleep. And then we'll also pop into REM, rapid eye movement sleep, which is typically where we think about dreams and dreaming that you're having. Technically, in every stage of sleep, you're even though we think of sleep as like my mind is turning off and then all of a sudden I have a dream, your mind is we think is actually active all throughout it, but just in different ways and in different varying degrees of things that we can remember. But your REM sleep is really important for things like your memory and
Yeah.
for learning new skills and skill
Okay.
acquisition as well. And so the how our sleep is set up, the first half of the night, uh, typically that deep sleep is going to predominate. And then the second half of the night is the REM sleep is more active. And so if you're a household where you're not having consistent bedtime and wake times, or your kids are not consistently getting the sleep opportunity, actually time in bed for what they need, then most likely what's going to happen is if you're sacrificing any amount of time your body's going to get deep sleep. It prioritizes that, and you get that. It's good for your body, your metabolism, everything kind of slows down and helps to refresh and recover. But then you're not getting that REM sleep, which is really important for your mind. And so that's another way that I put it to families is, the consequence of that is your kid's not getting the same kind of benefit from their sleep that their mind needs compared to if you were allowing them to have that time that they need in bed.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that, Benjamin. So now we know we have screens, so how big of a role does screen time play in sleep issues, both for children and for adults?
Yeah, I mean, I would say screen time is definitely huge. We know that, especially like tablet or cell phone, that kind of screen use before bed, on one level, it just delays bedtime. So it eats at your total duration of getting adequate sleep just from I'm, continuing my time to be awake to be on this screen.
Yeah.
I think more people now are realizing about light exposure. And so then,
Hmm.
when you are using a screen, then that's sending signals to your brain that it's essentially still daytime. And so you're not going to
Yeah.
feel as sleepy because you have all of this light exposure. But what we don't really talk about a lot as well is also that happens from any amount of light that's in your house as well. So really, even just having your lights on overhead or really bright lights or things of that nature can also impact your ability to start feeling sleepy and kind of winding down as well. So
Hmm.
definitely, if a family talks that or admits that they have, screen time use before bed, that's
Yeah.
one of the things that we will talk about is really trying to move that earlier in the evening and shutting that off a lot earlier, or trying to just discontinue that altogether.
Okay, that's true because sometimes even I myself, I'll be honest, I have to make sure that before I go up to our bedroom, I would leave my phone in the kitchen. You know, it's just I have it there because you kind of like sometimes being tempted to look at it if you have it in the bedroom. You know what I mean? So there's still one more message that's coming. There's still one more thing. So I have to kind of like discipline myself. That's it. And that's what we did with our family. So we, me and my husband, we would leave our phone outside the bedroom. That kind of like
Yeah.
helps us that when it's bedtime, it's bedtime.
Yeah.
So we won't have phones in the bedroom. So
Yeah.
just to make sure that we get a rest better,
Yeah,
so
yeah. And I think that's really important, even just from a Christian worldview too, of
mm,
like you look at even just the opening pages of Genesis, that God took chaos and darkness and created light and order. And so
yeah.
that order that God has given us in daytime and nighttime is reflected in ourselves in waking and sleeping. And so we have disconnected ourselves from this ordered creation. And
Hmm.
screens can really get in the way of actually transitioning away from, okay, I God has gotten me through this day. I've spent this day in whatever way, and I need to transition to rest and to tomorrow. Um,
Yeah.
and exactly what you said. So many times it's like there's another message, there's another thing. There's all this stuff that we can look at, but then for so many Christians, then what we are missing may be connecting with God. Very
Hmm.
often, I have families and patients that they're just so busy that they don't even have a regular quiet time or time to spend with God or things of that nature because they filled their life up with so many things. And so, one silver lining, I guess, to if you're having a little bit of disturbed sleep or difficulty falling asleep, or you're waking up in the night too, is there is this invitation to connect with God that, as you said, like the house is quiet, everyone is asleep. And it really is a mindset shift from, um, I call sleeplessness a nearsighted sorrow because, everyone else is asleep. Inevitably, the person who has terrible insomnia marries the person who falls asleep like that, no problem. And they're like,
Okay.
oh my gosh, like, like he falls asleep like in 2 seconds and I can't fall asleep for like 3 hours kind of a thing. Um, and so one of the things I talk about in my book is really just trying to kind of shift our mindset a little bit and allowing the Bible to, kind of seep into our hearts in a way that we can think about our sleeplessness differently. And one of those core things is that this just might be an opportunity for me to connect with God
Hmm.
because my life is so full and I just haven't allowed for him the margin to be able to kind of hear him.
Yeah.
Um, it's that flip from people might often say like, okay, I can't hear God. God's not speaking to me, but it might just be that God's speaking to you. It's just, are you listening? Like,
Yes.
am I actually like slowing down
Yes.
to be able to be in a mindset where I can actually hear him? Because so many people for their sleeplessness, they're worried about tomorrow and they're thinking about all of the things on their to-do list and, thinking or back through like conversations they had from the day. And so we can get so fixated on my life and my specific situation that we can miss the opportunity to connect with God.
Yeah. Especially when he said, come to me. Sometimes that's one of the reason why I've talked to some moms, and the reason why sometimes they can't sleep because loads of burdens, and we know that that's a fact. You know what I mean? So that's what Jesus said in the last days. In this world, you're gonna have tribulations, but be of good cheer. He said, I have overcome the world. And I love that you said that because that's what he said. Come to me. The invitation is there. If you can't sleep because you're wondering of all the weights that you are carrying, why not give it to Jesus? Because he said, come to me, all you who are, weary, you have all the problems that you're carrying, you're heavy laden, and the invitation is there. So he
Yeah.
said, come to me and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me. I
Yeah.
love that. Learn from me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you're saying just the times that we live in, people forget that in the opening verses of Revelation, it talks about like, happy is the person who reads this book. And you
yes.
can go on through the rest of that book. You're like, how am I supposed to be happy about this? Like, this is crazy,
Yeah,
kind of a
yeah.
thing. But then I think then that says more about how we are interpreting that book in the Bible and how we are um perceiving things. If I am so caught up in, oh my gosh, I'm seeing all these things in the world, we must be in the end times, Jesus is coming back any second, and that leads me to despair. um I I think that should make us like pause and reflect, because it's like, okay, wait a second, but Revelation opens with, happy is the person who has read this
Yes.
book. So like, what is it that this book is really trying to do? I would
Yeah.
argue that it's, as an apocalyptic literature, it's showing like the reality of
Yes.
the world and the spiritual veil being lifted and seeing all of this stuff that is happening. And the benefit is that's always happening all throughout. You look at church history, people are constantly turning to Revelation and saying like, this must be it. This must be, like the time. And the one thing we can say about everyone who has said that so far is that everyone's been wrong up to today and to this point, because we're still here. And so I think it really, this is really where it kind of comes down to like, how I move through my night can really be a part of my spiritual life and my spiritual formation. Like, if Christ has commanded me to watch, I think the early church really took that seriously, and that um, uh, expecting and anticipating Jesus's return. And so I think what we get wrong a little bit nowadays is that how am I being formed into Jesus? Like, how am I becoming more like Christ? If the way that I am um, interpreting the world around me is moving me away from the fruits of the spirit. I'm not becoming a person of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control,
Mm-hmm.
there's something wrong. So I think, people who have no problems with their sleep, it's easy for them to not think about this kind of stuff because they sleep and it's fine, it's no issue. And it's really the people who, whether they have chosen to give up their sleep or not, or just are faced with it, um, they are confronted with, I think, this just reality of that the night, the light, the who I am and how I'm responding to my sleeplessness is also, part of my Christian walk and part of my Christian life.
Yeah, that's so true. That's what John said, happy. So we are blessed when we read it because we're not like going to be surprised. We are prepared mentally. We are prepared spiritually. I believe God wanted us to be prepared because He doesn't want us to be caught up with something that we didn't know. So God wanted us to be prepared as a soldier of Him, to be prepared in this battle because we wrestle not against flesh and blood, against principalities, powers. So that's what we're fighting with. So God wanted us to prepare, and as a family, sometimes we can really give all of that worry that we are having at the moment, because we do have that, as we are in a fallen world. So that's what it is. And the good thing is the Lord has prepared something better for us. So like what you said, if we're going to be focusing on to be becoming more like Him, how did He serve people? How did He love people? So I think that's a great message to share to other people, that we can be the ambassador of Christ, of His love. And to see that this is happening, it's just the word of God. It needs to be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but His word shall not pass away. So that's what it is. So I want to ask you, Benjamin. So going back, right, as parents, what habits then would you advise for us? So we can have a better, or we can improve in our sleeping habits. What would be your advice on that?
I think one of the biggest things, kind of as we were talking about with screen time too, is really just turn all lights off as much
Then,
as possible. Oftentimes, like if a family has light switches that are dimmable, then I say, dim the lights as much as possible. If you have little ones who genuinely are kind of scared of the dark and that's still kind of a rough time for them, so trying to kind of keep any night lights or switches off as much as possible. But that's a common challenge of like, okay, if you want to see how quickly you can feel sleepy, turn all the lights so you can't even see like the hand in front of your face, and then sit in that darkness for like 30 minutes and don't, like do anything, don't have a cell phone, don't do anything. And most people, if they're able to kind of endure that, then they'll notice like, oh wow, actually I start feeling sleepy pretty quickly. But we just have all of these lights on and all this stuff that kind of disconnects us from that. So I think something that is it in some ways, really helpful for all people, if you're in a place that it's difficult to wind down for the night, is to really, just turn everything off. Another thing too is if you have multiple children,
yeah,
we parents really quickly realize like no two children are the same. They're all different. They're all
yeah,
unique, and the
they,
same thing is for their sleep too. So
yeah,
we can sometimes get caught into a similar, um, faulty logic of like, oh, okay, you know, my older son, when he was at this age, this is how much he slept. So I can expect a similar thing from this child at this age. And it might
yeah,
truly be different. Like you have one child who at a certain age needs 11 hours, but then another child who only needs 8 hours. And so that can be really kind of off putting if you don't know those normal ranges. If you're just comparing between your children, or like we talked about already, the mom's group and all the other kids that are there too. So
yeah,
so then with that is also then allowing for, those differences. A big thing that happens is as children get older, their
mhm,
circadian rhythm, which you can think of as an activating rhythm, this is the reason why if you're awake for 24 hours, then the next morning you might notice either a slight boost in energy, or maybe just you're not quite as sleepy as you just were. And that is because your circadian rhythm is on the upswing, because that's the time of the day your body has been entrained to be awake. And so
Oh,
that is part of the reason why young children, their
yeah,
circadian rhythms are usually earlier than adult parents. And so they're waking up at like 5 a.m. or 4 or something like that. And they're like ready
yeah.
to kind of start their day. But what
And you'll
happens
tell
is
them go
kids
back
get,
to bed.
yeah, go back. Yeah, exactly. But then as kids get older and they start
Yeah.
getting closer to puberty age range, there's a natural delay in their circadian rhythm as well. And so if you have a teenager, it actually might be normal for them to have a slightly later bedtime and wake time. So one of those things is just allowing for that, accommodating to that change that happens in the body, and also recognizing if that's if it swings too much, then that's when we diagnose a child with a delayed sleep wake phase disorder. So that's where no matter what rain or shine, you have this kid who they're just not sleepy until like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. And then they want to sleep in until like 11 a.m. kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And it's only a disorder in that they live in a society that doesn't always accommodate them to be able to do that. So I've had some families who have chosen to homeschool because they have a child like this, that their body just doesn't want to be awake when the typical school starts in their school system. And
Yeah.
so, as we're talking about this, I'm not necessarily saying like every
Yeah.
family should do this, but like having some ability to be creative and to kind of think what's going to work for your specific family. So then, you
Mm-hmm.
know, one of the key things for the delayed sleep wake phase disorder versus is my kid just, delaying their bedtime and then they're just like sleeping in, is that they will consistently want to sleep in that window, that delayed window. And when they do, they have no problems. Versus the kids who, are trying to accommodate to the school system, they're really sleepy and, have difficulty in their morning classes and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
all throughout the school week. But then when they sleep at that desired bedtime on the weekend, they're totally fine. So if that sounds like one of the, that sounds like your kid for anyone who's listening, that might be what's going on. And the problem is with delayed sleep wake phase disorder is if you treat it like insomnia, you're not actually going to make any progress because your body
Okay.
wants to sleep later. So we can't do the same thing as someone who's either intentionally or unintentionally delaying their bedtime due to whether that's worries or their schedule or whatever kind of stressors that are preventing them from being able to fall asleep. That's a different problem
Yeah.
compared to the child who my body just doesn't want to sleep until 2 a.m. And so that requires a slight different approach.
Okay. Because I've noticed that with my daughter, she'll be 16 soon, and I've
Mm-hmm.
noticed the change in her sleeping habit. Because I'm used to kind of like, okay, you need to be in bed now. Yeah. Mom, I'm not sleepy yet, and she'll
Yeah.
be like reading and stuff like that. And then I'll be like,
Mm-hmm.
bedtime now. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So until you have to say, "No, you have to go to bed now. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, okay, mom. Yeah, I'm nearly done. I'm just like one more paragraph here, and then I'll go to bed. So
Yeah.
that you just have to remind, so you can see the changes in their sleeping patterns. So I have noticed that. So how can we as parents then can say that our children, you know, how can we tell if they're getting enough sleep? So is that do we just have to gauge it by the hour, like what you said, the hour of how much they slept, and then we can say, okay, they got 8 hours, or she got 9 hours or 10 hours, and then we can measure then that they got, proper sleep. Would that be a thing
Yeah,
then to
I
do?
say that's definitely the best place to start is this the timing, the duration that they have,
Yeah.
knowing those age appropriate norms and whether my child is falling into that. So keeping if you Google sleep wake or sleep diary, then there's a whole bunch of resources that you can find
Hmm.
where you could keep a tally over 2 weeks and then take the average. If that average is within the normal, then you're good to go. But then some other aspects of sleep health are also kind of more subtle in that, like how satisfied is your child with like how their sleep was when they wake up. It's normal for people to have a little bit of what's called sleep inertia. That's kind of like the, rubbing the sand out of your eyes and the feeling
Yeah.
kind of
Okay.
sleepy, groggy for 30 minutes. That's okay, as long as that
Yeah.
pretty quickly resolves and then you're up and you're able to kind of get going through your day.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're like just don't feel your child, if they're old enough that you can ask them, like, how do you feel? Do you feel refreshed? Do you feel good? Kind of a thing. That might be something too. So even if they are getting the normal duration, there could be something
Yeah.
else that's fragmenting their sleep as well. And then also just their alertness during the day. We think of people who have disrupted sleep as being sleepy, but for some children, it's the opposite. They actually get more hyper, more inattentive, and that's why there's this overlap between sleep problems and ADHD. And that's also sometimes my job is to tease out, whether one or both or neither are present, kind of a thing. So timing, looking at the alertness, and then some of the things that we went back to, some of that
Yeah.
efficiency. If
Mm-hmm.
a child's really strongly resisting bedtimes and families are having difficulty maintaining the boundaries and the limits, that child still may be able to get enough sleep, but it might be impacting mom and dad's sleep so that you're not getting enough sleep, kind of a thing.
You're waiting for
So
him to sleep or for her to sleep first.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So especially if like a parent is an early riser, they have to get up earlier, and the kid has some ability to sleep in later. So even though their sleep is technically fine, because they're having this behavioral issue at the beginning of the night or during the night, then that might be impacting the parent's sleep, which, go back full circle, that might be fine for some parents. I think I might have said this before we started recording, that a lot of my career has been spent in the military. And so helping military families and children get more sleep, and service members get more sleep. And that's a very different situation. If a family is in Alaska, separated from any kind of typical support system that they have, oh, yeah, my spouse is deployed, so I'm by myself. I'm, 7 months pregnant, and I still have two kids who are sleeping in the same bed as me. That's a very
Yeah.
different situation than someone who is in a community that they have grown up there, or they have deep roots, they have a support system, they have other people that are
Yeah.
helping them. And you're like, actually, yeah, my sleep is a little bit off, but I am able to function how I want to in my day, and I have the support and the help for people to be able to help me out if I do need a short nap or something in the middle of all this. So it really does come back to specifically your family, your situation, and what's going
Mm-hmm.
on, and trying to find out, okay, what's the best path forward for you specifically.
Yeah, that is so true because every family is different, and it's also different if you have newborn baby. I don't know
Mhm.
how old is your child, Benjamin? So,
He is going to turn 11 this weekend, actually.
oh, 11-year-old. So,
Mhm,
so
mhm.
so would you remember when he was like a baby? You know what I mean? So,
Yeah,
how they don't really, we know they kind of like sleep long, but they up all night. So, to the
yeah.
moms that are like listening today, that oh my goodness, I have a nursing baby here that I'm up like at 2 a.m. and he'll sleep and then he'll wake up again. So how would you encourage that mom in that situation that have a nursing baby and she can't really have herself a good sleep because it's normal. She just have a new baby. What
Yeah,
encouragement can you give to
absolutely.
that mom?
For sure. I would say one thing is a little bit of that expectation management. There are some families that they don't understand infant sleep, and they have an expectation that they should be sleeping longer. So that's usually more kind of new parents. So just understanding, like, I call the first 3 months of a baby's life the fourth trimester. Like, it's also, you're just doing whatever you can to survive,
Yes,
and you're in
yes.
the
So
revolving
I
door
love
of
that. Yeah.
eat, pee, poop, sleep, like,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
it really feels like the pregnancy isn't actually over in some ways, because you're still getting up all during the night. So one of that is just recognizing that is actually normal. And so one thing I go back to is, talking about, okay, what kind of support do you have for your sleep as the mom? I give a little bit of tough love to my dads sometimes, to say, you know, do you want your wife totally sleep deprived, or do you want both of you to be partially sleep deprived? Kind of a thing of, trying to be like, uh, it's there are some men who still see like, well, the baby is, my wife's domain, or like you're breastfeeding, I can't do that. And so why wake up if I, like can't breastfeed? So sometimes we are having a conversation of, do moms want to pump and do a bottle so that way they're still giving breast milk, but then that lets dad get up one or two times during the night. And again, that goes back to goals and what families are specifically choosing for themselves as well. But just understanding that there are options there, but really just kind of remembering that, also we can also make good things idols. Like humans, we love making idols out of anything, and so sleep can become an idol as well. And so if I'm prioritizing my sleep over my wife's sleep as well, it reminds me a little bit of like Proverbs 10:5, he who gathers in summer is a son who acts wisely, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who acts shamefully. It's
Mhm.
this, it's not necessarily that the sleep is a sin. It's when that sleep is, impacting the work of the day. So whereas a nap during the summer, is wise because it's the midday heat and you are going to be tired anyways, you can take a
Yeah.
short nap and that is reasonable to do. But if there's work to be done and there's a harvest that's going on right now, you don't have time to sleep in the same way. And so it's that same thing for like the different seasons that you find yourself in, might require different approaches to your sleep. Um,
Yes.
so that's one thing is the Bible helps us think about our sleep communally and my relationships with the people who are around me. And so certainly any giving up of your sleep, when anytime we sacrifice sleep, that is an act of love. And so, mothers by necessity are sacrificing their sleep to love their child and to give them what they need, very literally, when they are feeding them in the night in those first 3 months. So really, I think it's that even once you understand that that's the norm of like no further burden should be put upon you as the mom. So really it's more, I think, see it as a call of how can we support this mom, whether that is with a spouse, or if the grandparents are available to come and be with the family during that time, so that way family members can be there to kind of help support overnight as well. And really this is just where the Christian imagination should take over, because when we see the brokenness and sin of the world and the suffering that happens, then Christians should be the first ones to be able to think of different ways that we can fix that, because we have a different um, mindset, a different end, and that like Christ has already come, his kingdom is already here, but not yet fully realized. So, how can I be the hands and feet of Christ in a way that is different from someone who's just, not operating from that understanding and just operating from, I'm just kind of fixing problems. Um, and so, even if that is for like friends of a newborn, like maybe we can't do anything, but maybe I sleep really well and I can say, hey, when you're up feeding your baby, call me on a cell phone and we can talk or chat or something like that if you're having difficulty like falling back asleep or something, because I have no problem falling asleep. Like it when we see that our sleep is connected to others, like we can have those conversations and have different solutions that we wouldn't otherwise get to.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. And the reason why I actually just put that in because I know I have experienced that. I have five children, right? And because I am from the Philippines originally, Benjamins, I have no family in here that I could call my mom, Mom, can you help me with my baby, or my dad, right?
Yeah.
Or sisters.
Hmm.
I have none. And so
Hmm.
it's although my husband is Irish, but we are in the city and he only has like a family but is in the countryside, you know what I mean, so it's still, so we don't really have a family that we can call to kind of like help. And because he is working early in the morning, he will be at 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning depending where he's going to be working at, because he does construction. So I let him sleep because I know he needs to go to work early in the morning.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm the one that would be like staying late. That's kind of like my decision, that that's okay.
Yep.
You get your sleep because you're gonna go to work and I'll be home anyway. You know what I mean? And that's what I've seen the beauty of homeschooling, because you can lie in, so when your
Mhm.
baby's sleeping, and you can still stay in bed, and then that's what I have seen, that my little children that at that time were still small will be, then when they wake up, will still be just cozy in bed just to rest a little bit more, you know. Although some would like to get up, but those little ones that would like to stay with me, okay, let's just stay a little bit more. Let's just be quiet because mommy needs to rest a little bit more. And then we all gonna get up. So I
Yeah.
think that's one of the beauty that I have seen in homeschooling. And as I get older, of course, you kind of like learn, you get wisdom, right? And my daughter, who's gonna be 16 now, when I had my youngest is 2, right? And so she's already like bigger though. So she can see that I need that sleep. So when things like this happen, that when I have a baby at that time, let's say nearly 3 years ago, because my baby will be 3 already next month, she would be saying to me, "Mom, that's okay." Now, in the afternoon, she will say to me, "Mom, you have your nap. Have an hour nap. Just have a rest, an hour nap too. I'll be looking after here the boys." So they will just like play color, play Lego, and then she'll just let mommy have some rest, because tonight she won't be able to have a good sleep again because of the baby. So I have seen this in my children's lives, how they were able to kind of like cooperate, how were they were able to kind of like organize that time just to learn to serve as well me as their mom, because I am serving them too, because they know mommy just needs some rest, because later on she's going to be cooking. We all need to help each other. But that's the beauty of homeschooling. You are training your children to have that servant attitude as well. You know what I mean? To not to be just
Yeah.
like it's all about me.
Mhm.
I want my time, but to learn as well. How can I help mom? How can I help dad? How can I be, you know, a hand, like what you said there? We can be the hand of Christ. We can be the mouth of Christ. How can I help? So that's what I've seen in a family, especially if you're homeschooling, that there's closer relationship. It's there's bonding, you know what I mean? So, and
Yeah.
that's what gets me through those sleepless nights. So just our family kind of like helping out each other. And I know, and I have seen other families are the same. So I thank God for that. I know not everyone can homeschool, but it's one of the things that you can see in a life of a homeschool mom or a homeschooling family. So I want to ask you, Benjamin, because I know we don't have a lot of time here now. Thanks for staying with me. So if any parents that's listening right now, fathers or mothers, any family, and they would love to have a better sleep, what would you recommend? What would you recommend to them? What's the first step that you would be recommending to these families?
Yeah, I think the first step would be, I think in some ways, being open to imagine something different, that um that things can change. Um and again, like we've already said, the mom who's in the middle of a 2 month old who's super colicky and is up all hours in the night, like I'm not asking more of them in that situation. If anything, like we've been talking about, if the focus of this podcast is Christian homeschool, then as Christians, we are part of the body of Christ. And so
Yes.
when one part of the body is suffering, then all of us are suffering, whether we acknowledge that or not. So I think one is just, I would encourage families to be creative and not necessarily just accepting that, like, oh, well, you're getting terrible sleep and you're in a newborn period and that's just part of life. Of being
So
willing
be
to
it.
be, yeah, exactly.
So
And
be
just
it. Like, yeah.
yeah, acknowledge that, in Exodus, when there is a list of laws where God is talking about the vulnerable and how we need to treat the vulnerable, one of them is the poor person who has given up their cloak in collateral for some debt. And then the person who's holding that cloak is commanded by God to give it back to them, because it says, "For what else will he sleep in or lie down in? He will cry out to me and I will hear him because I'm gracious." So, like, God specifically acknowledges the suffering of sleeplessness of this poor person, and that shows that within God's character, he cares about suffering, even the suffering of sleeplessness. And so, if it's that important to God that he's commanded that for that poor person in Israel, then we need to be thinking about situations where I might be holding that cloak from someone, where I'm,
Amen.
it in even though it's socially acceptable for me to just be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That's such a terrible time. Um, we don't acknowledge that as Christians, we're held to a higher standard when someone is suffering within the body.
Yeah.
And we can get so overwhelmed with bad news and the world and all this stuff that I have no control over. But if I'm in my uh, mom group, or I'm in my small group, or I'm in a season of life where, I'm thinking about maybe some older people or grandparents or things of that nature or maybe that age, but they don't have grandchildren of their own, you know, there is a real unique opportunity here to be the hands and feet of Christ to new mothers, to get the rest that they need. So all that
Amen.
to say, I think thinking about sleep in this way from the Bible helps us to open our this godly imagination of allowing the Spirit to reveal to us ways that we can encourage one another and lift one another up and support one another.
Amen. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for all the advice that you gave us. I know this is like fantastic, and I really enjoyed our chat today. So I believe this is going to be a help to those moms that are having, kind of like difficulty. Either it's their sleep or their children's sleep, just to have like a reminder, just to have just information for them. So where can they find you,
Yeah,
Benjamin?
the best place to find me. So my book that came out is called Sleep Habits Journal: Practices, Prayers, and Devotions to Ease Your Sleepless Night. You can go to sleephabitsjournal.com if you're interested in purchasing that. So that would be more specifically for the adults who are having difficulty falling asleep themselves and how they can think about responding to it differently. Even if you're in a season of, um, you know, parenthood and their children that are interrupting your sleep, I still think it could be beneficial for those individuals as well. And especially for my Ireland listeners, I would assume maybe Amazon might be the best retailer, because but all of them are listed there. So any that you might be able to get international, you can find them there. Um, and then you can connect with me. I'm most active on Substack now, where I do a lot of writing. And so the sleephabitsjournal.com will take you to my website, so you can connect with me further from there.
Lovely. Thanks for sharing that. So I will put that as well in the show notes below. And moms, if you find this podcast helpful, can you please share it to your mama friend that would also benefit in this podcast? And if you are listening in your, Apple, Spotify, I would appreciate if you can leave a review, because that would also help our, channel to kind of just like push to the other moms that also, need to hear this message. If you are listening in YouTube, you can like, subscribe, leave a comment. So we would love to get connected with you. So if this is something that will be an encouragement to you, because we know motherhood is a journey and we all need to encourage one another and lift each other up. So we are here to do that. We're here to serve. So Benjamin, would you please pray for our listeners today, to the moms or dads that's listening today, please?
Absolutely. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time to talk about
Amen.
the gift of sleep that you have given us, and just acknowledging how living in a broken, fallen world that can get disrupted. And so, Father, I just pray right now for, if someone's listening to this at 2 a.m. and they just feel like they are all alone, and, are isolated in their sleeplessness, then, Father, just ask for your Spirit to draw near to them, that they may see that you are there present with them in the sleepless night, and just waiting for them to connect. And so I just ask for the perseverance and courage for all the moms and dads listening who are faced with sleeplessness, that you would help them to have that courage to respond in a different way and to really just be open to your voice and to what you might have to say and how you might be meeting them in that night. And we
Amen.
love you and praise you. In Jesus'
Yes.
name we pray all these things. Amen.
Amen. Well, Benjamin, thanks again for your time today. Thanks for joining me again today. And moms, thank you for your time today. And Lord willing, we'll see you next week. God bless.